Hey everybody, how are you? Happy Friday afternoon if you're on the East Coast. Happy Friday morning still if you're on the West Coast. And if you're somewhere in between, happy lunch hour. Right? Leadership in Changing Times. My name is Ian Hill. This is Leading Others Today, the Emerging Leaders Track. This is a coaching session, but we're also going to do a lot of teaching. So we're going to change it up a little bit. We're going to do some teaching. We got Margie in the chat box. Hi, Margie.
Hello.
Margie is here joining us and will be joining us in the future, so get to know Margie a little bit. And Jeff is behind the glass. He's not going to say hi, but he waved, but you can't see him. And Keith is behind him. It's like this layers. So that, you ever see those movies on submarines? And they're like, down 5 depths, and then down 5 depths, down 5 depths, down 5. That's what happens around here. Somebody says something, and then it gets shouted down hallways. But anyways, or in rooms, right? You don't care. Really. Honestly, do you care? No, you don't care. Just, Ian, get to it. Get on with it, Ian. We have things to do. I agree. All right. So what are we doing today? We're continuing the discussion and the dialogue of being an agent of change, the individual that understands, demonstrates, and exerts influence to build trusting relationships to act as a catalyst for change. And the last time we got together, we talked about what were some keys to building those trusting relationships. And one of the things was listening. And listening like someone's going to die at midnight. And then we talked about a formal way that you could listen. I challenged you to send out that survey. Remember, I challenged you to send out that survey. What am I doing right? What am I doing wrong? Your suggestions for my improvement. And if you could send me back to school, what class would you make me take? Remember that? Did you send it out? Did you get some feedback? Did you get some insight? Did you get some wisdom? And did you do what I asked you to do and challenge you to do and listen? Like people were going to die at midnight, to your kids, to your spouse, to your coworkers, to those that you supervise? Did you work on the listening? I hope you did. Now, this session, this time is supposed to be meant to ask questions. And we're going to give you an opportunity to do that. Now, how can you ask questions? The main way to ask questions today is in the chat box. In the chat box. Margie is in the chat box. You put your question in, and then you can know that I will respond. Now, let's say that you don't want to put in the chat box because you're in a room, in a group. Okay, you don't want to do that? Then I've got my handy-dandy little phone here, which Margie's supposed to have, but now we're live TV, and she doesn't have it because I had it, and I forgot to give it to her, and so now we're stuck, and I can't walk over there now because I'm tethered. So she's going to see a hand here in just a second, but stay there for right now. But then we'll hand it to her. You'll see a hand come in, be this mysteriously hand. Anyways, you can email in your question at, there it is. Good job, Jeff. Look at that. At Ian@thechangingpoint.com, Ian@thechangingpoint, all one word, .com. Now remember, if you email me and you don't want to know, don't want anybody to know who you are, then you got to make sure that you put in the email, don't tell anybody who I am, because then we'll know not to say your name on the thing. Now, I'm going to hand this to Margie now, and then she can look and see if any questions come in. Come in, reach. Oh my God! Ah! You didn't even see your hand. How about that? You ever see that show Tool Time? Was that what it was called, Tool Time? And there was a guy with the fence, and all you saw was, that's Margie. All you see is just this thing right here. You just see your name in there, Mysterious Margie. Anyways, okay, here's the drill. You can email Ian@thechangingpoint.com if you have a question, or you can put it in the chat box. Either way. We introduced information last time in our teaching session, this idea of the agent of change. And I told you in that session, the last thing that we talked about was the 3 reasons why employees don't perform. That there was only 3 reasons why employees don't perform. Reason number 1, they don't know the expectations. No one has sat down with them and clarified for them, here's what I expect. So they're working off of a different set of expectations. And then you look over at their performance and you're like, what is up with you, dude? Don't you understand what we expect? But no one clarified that for them, so they're working off of their own expectations of what good or excellent or sound performance looks like, and then there's incongruency. Your perspective of what good performance looks like, their perspective of what good performance looks like, the two don't match up. And then you get frustrated. Second reason why employees don't perform, they don't have the tools. Now, tools could mean they never had the ability in the first place. You hired the wrong person. Or you didn't give them the training that they needed, or they don't have the physical tools. They're trying to do the job with a broken broom or whatever. I'm just using that as an example. But you know, you're trying to ask them to do something. As you guys all know, I used to help run a really big casino, and I walked in one time. We used to feed 20,000 people a day sometimes, and I had about 1,100 employees. And I remember walking into the buffet. You ever been to a buffet? I walked in the buffet, and it was a pit. A pit. There was food everywhere. And I was bent. In charge of all the restaurants, in charge of all the bars, in charge of all the food and beverage and everything, big time executive. I am unhappy. Call the manager over. Call the busboys over. What is going on around here? And I used to be a busboy at that place and that hotel. That's where I started. So I knew how to be a busboy, and everybody knew I knew how to be a busboy. So we're going to have a little chat. And this young man, he was probably 17 years old. He said, I understand that you're upset, Mr. Hill, but can I show you something? I was like, yeah. So he takes me into this bus station. And he lifts up a little dustpan, and he lifts up a little hand broom that was about this big. He holds them out to me, and he says, this is all we have to sweep with. Now, remember that, if you will, that this is a 280-seat restaurant that we turned over, 10, 12, 15 times in a day. Just, and this kid was looking at me and said, dustpan, hand broom is what we have as a group of employees to clean the restaurant with. I said, how many of those do you have? He said, you're looking at it. And I said to the manager, why aren't we ordering the proper equipment to get this place cleaned up? He said, because you restricted all purchases of supplies. So ultimately, was it those kids' fault that the restaurant was a pit? No, I didn't provide them the tools. So it could be expectations, could be tools. Now you realize I fired that kid, right? No, I didn't fire the kid. We promoted him because he was smart. And then finally, why don't people perform? They think they have a choice. Oh, wait a minute, what? Think they have a choice. Let's be clear. There are certain things that people have choices in the workplace that we give free rein. You know, you have a choice, you can do whatever you want. There's other things that these are the sequences we follow. The most overt one in the public works industry is safety, right? There's certain safety protocols that we follow that there is no choice. You do it like this, you do it like this, you do it like this, and then you do it like this. And you follow that sequence. And it's because people, in some instances, their lives are at stake in some of the jobs that some of you do. That's just the way it is. In other situations, let's say public information situations or planning documents or the sequence of how a document is submitted, the review process, if you're on the engineering side of things, there is a way we do this. That's it. That's the way we do it, period. You don't vary from it. Well, usually what happens, and what I mean by think they have a choice is, people get that confused. They get confused on what they have a choice in and what they don't have a choice in. Now look at all three of those. At the end of the last broadcast, I made the case, I tried to make the case, that all three of those are the leader's responsibility. Those busboys were doing the best job that they could, but the leader had failed to provide them the tools. In other situations, the leader didn't clarify the expectations in some formal or meaningful way. And then check for understanding, because it's one thing to say, do you understand? And every human being is going to go like this, yep, I understand. And then in their head they're saying, I have no idea what he's talking about, but I'll just fake it. And then finally, they think they have a choice. So there's this lack of congruency between what we say there's choices in and what there's no choice in. We're doing it this way. Now somebody will push back at me and say, well, you don't know my situation and you don't know the conflict we're having between the management and the union. Well, I don't care about any third-party agreement. They say, what do you mean you don't care? Every third-party representation agreement says that performance is a certain way and must be done a certain way. Nowhere in any of those agreements does it say somebody can do a bad job. Nowhere. There's nowhere. So you can't push back on me as a leader and say, well, yeah, I know, but there's conflict between management and the union. Okay, there may be conflict, but I guarantee you that document doesn't say you get to do a bad job, right, Jeff? That document does not say you get to do a bad job. Nowhere. There are performance standards. Ultimately, who's responsible for performance? You and me, the leaders. So you can ask questions today, and I'll answer them. But I'm going to take some time to talk about a process for managing poor performance. The agent of change has a process to manage poor performance. The agent of change takes into consideration those three things. The agent of change knows how to change performance and does it in a real and meaningful way. So what I want to do today is I want to talk a little bit about that. Now, you can ask your questions, but I want to talk about this and then we'll open it up for questions, okay? Or we'll take the questions. So this idea, this question, how do I manage quality performance? How do I take someone who's poorly performing and move them to exceptional performance? Or how do I move them to standard performance? Well, we got to back up a little bit and think philosophically. Listen to what I put in the bubble there. Know that as a leader, your treatment of employees has a positive or negative effect on the way the employee views you personally, as well as how the employee views the organization as a whole and the quality of time the employee spends with his or her family. Now stop and think about that. You as a leader have an impact on people. You as a leader have an impact on their environment. You as a leader have an impact on their stress level. You as a leader have an impact on their home life. You and only you can create an upbeat, positive, highly productive environment for an employee to work in, or an environment that encourages low productivity, poor morale, and complaints. No, Ian, that's the director's job. No, my friend, that's your job. Just because people above you aren't quality leaders does not absolve you of the responsibility to be a quality leader. It's interesting, in a session yesterday, we got a question. And this guy asked a question. He said, I'm having trouble respecting my leaders because they're not very effective, which makes me not want to buy into the organization. That was such a telling question, but also statement, because he validated what I'm saying here. Somebody's image of the organization is mostly drawn on whoever directly supervises them. If that direct supervisor is good, they have a positive image of the organization. Direct supervisor bad, negative impression. Or at least they lean that way. So it is a moral issue from my standpoint. Of being able to work and lead people is a moral issue. So then what's the most effective way to help people move from poor performance to quality performance? Most effective way. Well, as a young leader coming up the ranks, I had to develop a leadership style. I'm challenging you to look within yourself at your leadership style. And I'm then challenging you to say, if you're not completely satisfied with it, build yours, right? Build one. And that's the process we're in, right? So I looked around and said, where were people getting the most from other people? Well, I had coached. I had coached on the high school and the university level in the United States for 7 years, and we had great success. I was a track and field coach, and we won a 5A state championship, and I got to coach on the college level for a short period of time, and we had good success, and I coached really, really fast kids. Now, before you're impressed with that, just remember that coaching track is not very hard at all, because all of coaching track is this: veer left, boys, and hurry back. Just veer left, boys, and hurry back. That's all it is. Just veer left and go as fast as you can. Come on back. But I noticed something in that. I noticed that I could have young men and young women run so hard that they would throw up and then be excited to come back the next day. Doesn't make any sense. Well, that little epiphany that I had was the same epiphany that business leaders and management and professional gurus came across at the beginning of the industrial age, 50s, 60s. As we moved into that industrial after World War II and then evolved into the 70s and 80s, more sophisticated performance management strategies and the like. People looked around like I did and said, where is there in life where someone is getting the most from people? And you know what they said? Athletics. They said, look, in athletics, somehow they are getting these people to give everything they have, be exhausted, and come back the next day. So then it became chic to tap in and use the fundamentals of coach is in the workplace. Coaching. And so all of a sudden there was all this talk about we got to be good coaches, and we got to coach somebody, and we got to coach them, and coaching. You may have gone to the workshop, you may have seen the tape or the book, read the book or whatever. Coaching as a performance management strategy. Me personally, I don't know if I want to get caught up in all that nonsense, but I at least want to say this. I do think that if I identify poor performance, there are some strategies that can be used to help that person go from poor performance to standard or maybe even exceptional. And it is ironic that those same approaches are what you would call a coach in the athletic endeavor. Well, now today we have life coaches, we have fitness coaches, we have athletic coaches, we have business coaches, we have executive coaches. It's now become a whole part of our vernacular to coach somebody. But what does that really mean? Well, coaching is pretty simple, and you see the diagram on the third page there. Coaching is just taking somebody where they're at today and helping them move towards what they could potentially become. Taking somebody where they're at today and helping them move to what they could potentially become. It is intense. It is people-centric leadership. And in a moment, we'll break it down into very tangible steps. But conceptually, it's about setting tone and vision. Conceptually, it's about teaching. Conceptually, it's about listening so you can teach. Conceptually, it's not about demanding, but inspiring. Conceptually, it's about acting as a guide, and it's about talking to people's hearts to get the best from them. How you do that, we will talk about today, and we will talk about in the teaching session in the coming weeks. Because there has to be some practical to this. In other words, leadership skills have to be backed up by managerial effectiveness. So, I'm a leader. Yeah, but can you manage the process of leadership? So it's one thing to say motivate people. It's another thing to have a system to motivate. It's another thing to say I'm going to coach somebody. It's another thing to have a system to do it, which we'll go through in just a second. What's your point, Ian? My point is that in today's day and age, I think agents of change have to be able to coach someone. because it's the performance management approach that would be most effective today. The autocratic, let me yell at you, let me intimidate you, let me bark at you, you better do what the heck I say approach is going to be fundamentally rejected today. No one's going for that today. You're not going for that, neither is anybody else. But we still have people who are performing poorly, and that we have to grow them to at least at minimum standard performance. This coaching approach is the approach that I would suggest. Now you see a bunch of words on the balance of that page. I'm not going to go through those right now in interest of time. But know this, coaches clarify, coaches counsel, and coaches must confront. We can't just let poor performance linger. In a couple of weeks when we talk about building pride, intentionally and strategically building pride and using pride as a performance tool, we know that pride gets sucked out of a group if somebody allows, or if someone is allowed to continually poorly perform. Just gets sucked out of a group. Because everybody looks around and says, why am I busting my ass if Joe over there is not working? So we must hold standards, we must counsel, and we must clarify. Clarifying what? Clarifying expectations. Counseling what? Counseling poor performance. Confronting what? Confronting when someone doesn't perform poorly. Now the word confront sounds confrontational, but what I mean by that is we address. We don't just walk past it. On the next 2 pages, there's some tips and there's a list of what I call always and nevers. We're going to get to the always and nevers in just a second. But I want you to pull out the diagram. I want you to pull out the diagram. Because this diagram is a process for coaching poor performance. How do I move somebody from performing poorly to excellence, or at least standard? Well, I think you have to first work off of the premise that there's only 3 reasons why employees don't perform. Expectation, tools, choice. And my job as a coach is to recognize the reason behind the poor performance. So walk with me, if you will, and in identifying an individual poor performance. So we got somebody and there's poor performance. Our initial reaction would be to go talk to them. Sit down and have a chat with them, or just talk with them. Hey, your performance has got to get better. I need to see it improve. And come on, we got to get better here, blah, blah, blah. Well, I think that's a flawed model. It's not going to be very effective. I think before you talk with anybody about poor performance, I think you've got to be a good doctor. Like a doctor, you've got to make a diagnosis so that we can apply the appropriate medicine to rectify the issue. Well, the reason they're not performing is because they're a bad person. That's not going to go very far today. If that's the premise you're working off of, you're going to get really frustrated. Well, the reason they're poorly performing is because they hate me, and they're just trying to screw me over. I know this guy. This guy's been trying to screw me over for years. That's why he shows up later. That's why he doesn't do what he's supposed to do. He's trying to stick it to me. Oh, you know where I work, Ian. No, that's not. I think that doesn't serve you well either. Because if you make it personal, it's very, very difficult to coach poor performance. It's very, very difficult. As soon as we get that personal conflict in there, we have a problem. So, number 1, I work off the premise that people are generally good people. 2, I work off the premise that I'm not going to get emotionally vested in the poor performance issue, because that doesn't serve me well. So as the good doctor, the first thing I'm doing is asking a lot of questions. And I'm only addressing performance. I'm not addressing the person. You are bad. No, you're not bad. I generally like people. I generally think people are good, but this performance is unacceptable. See, you can separate the two. Like you, you're a rare and unique creature with incredible talent and ability, and you have value because you're just a human being. All human beings have value, but this performance can't last. It's 2 different things. So you'll notice I created a flow chart. Why did you create a flow chart? Because it's easy to step by step follow. Just do this step and then do this step, and it's like a diagnostic. So I see poor performance. I got to do some diagnostics to figure out the cause of the poor performance so I can apply the appropriate strategy to rectify the poor performance. It has nothing to do with the person. Separate the two. Yeah, but what if their attitude sucks? You'll see. We'll address that in just a second. So the first question I have to ask when I come across a performance issue is it the whole group or is it one person? Because those two things, or the answer to that question, one of those two things, will dictate the approach. Like, I'll give you a more tangible example. Have you ever had an email come out to you or a memo, and it's addressed to everybody, but you know it's only meant for one person? Hey everybody, we've been having this issue, and so we all need to be mindful of blank. Please make sure you're doing blank. And in your mind, you're like, we all are doing blank. It's Bob that doesn't do blank. Why don't you just go talk to Bob? And then we all get frustrated because we're all getting lectured when we know it's just Bob that has the performance issue. Why do we do that? We do that because we're non-confrontational, we don't want to offend, we don't want to take on the performance issue, and we haven't done the diagnostic that says, is this a whole group issue or an individual issue? Because those two things call for different approaches. So let's walk down the side that it's a group issue, which would mean that we're seeing the poor performance multiple times from multiple people. Group issue. Is it individual or is it group? If it's group, that means we have a systemic issue. It means we have a systems issue, which means it can only be one of three things. Either they aren't trained right, policy's not good, procedure's no good. Well, what if they're all just sabotaging everything? They've rallied against us. The inmates are running the asylum. What if it's that? Well, it could be that, but stop and think about what you're saying. You're saying that a group of people have coordinated their activities to sabotage you and basic procedures and policies. Or it could happen. Well, I'm not saying it couldn't happen. I'm just saying then you have a lot more issues than are being addressed right now. That would mean your group has become so toxic that even the reasonable people in the group have got caught up in this thing that would be called anarchy. That's a pretty long step, brother. It's probably one of these three things. Now, maybe your environment is so toxic that what I just described is accurate. Well, then we need to have another chat separately of how you rectify that toxicity. But for now, let's just say system, the group is not doing it the way you want. It means it's only one of three things, and you should evaluate each one of these things. Training. Did we train them properly on that task? Yeah, we did. I showed them. Well, wait a minute now. I showed them? Is I showed them enough? Well, I asked them if they understood. Well, did you check for understanding? How do you know they understood? Training. Or it might be a bad policy. They're all trained, but we've given them a rule to follow, and we've hemmed them in so tightly that within that rule, they're not going to be able to do and achieve the result we want. Or is it bad procedure? Now, there's a difference between policy and procedure. Policy is the rule, procedure is how we do it. Maybe the procedure is bad. The sequence is out of whack. You would never get the result that you really want based on the sequence. And how do those things happen? How does a policy or procedure just go bad? Well, the funny thing about policies and procedures are they're usually created for a specific moment in time, often. But then things change, and that policy and procedure doesn't change along with it. And now all of a sudden the employees are working off of a procedure or policy of 5 years ago and expected to do work of today. So system group-wide issues break down into one of three things. I'm going to evaluate the training. Did we train well enough? I'm going to evaluate the policy. Is this a good policy still? I'm going to evaluate the procedure. Is this procedure still applicable, doing it this, and then this, and then this, and then this? Now, if the answer is no, then you got to retrain Got to redo the policy, redo the procedure. But let's just say that you've done that and performance still isn't where it needs to be. Then it's one of those three things: training, expectations, tools. But it's probably going to be training, policy, or procedure. So what do I do then? I take corrective measures. I either retrain, instill a new policy, establish a new procedure, and then look at that next box. I follow up. So if I have identified I think it's a training issue, then I train everybody again. I check for understanding, and then we implement. But then I'm going to follow up to make sure performance improves. If performance improved, then I'm going to celebrate. If performance didn't improve, then I know it wasn't training. It must be the policy. So then we go back, we rectify the policy. Implement, check, doesn't work, then it must be the sequence that we laid it out of how we want them to do it. But I can almost guarantee you it's one of those three things. Address those three things, and then systematically, if it's retraining, check, follow up, done, celebrate. Now that's a key part. If performance improved, you must go back and say, thank you, performance improved, great work. Or thank you, you're now following a new policy, great work. If performance doesn't improve, then it's got to be something else. But whatever we do, we're not going to let poor performance go. We're just not going to let it go. We're going to address it in this very systematic approach, sequential approach. Why? Because this can become a habit. This can become a habit. Now, you can argue with me all you want. We can argue, and you can come up with all the reasons why this doesn't work. I would then push back at you and say to you, okay, what's your approach? What's your sequential approach of systemic performance management or improvement? You don't have to use this approach. I'm okay with that. But you need to have an approach that can be laid out on paper and is sequential. Well, don't we already have a progressive discipline? You do. I'm sure that you and your HR department have progressive discipline. But this is the approach you're using before it goes into that. This is the approach that we use before we have to take those more formal corrective measures. That's the coaching. The agent of change coaches so that we don't have to get into that progressive discipline long before the issue becomes that overt. So question number one, is this everybody or is this just one person? If it's everybody, then I know I'm going to probably look at training. Maybe we didn't train everybody right or effectively. Or, you know what, maybe the policy was a policy we created in the past. Things have changed. Is it still applicable today? Or maybe that was a procedure we created 3 years ago. Gosh, everything's changed. That procedure is no longer effective. And then I deploy accordingly, check for follow-up to check to make sure performance is improved. If it has, I celebrate. If it hasn't, I circle back until it gets fixed. I can almost guarantee you that your group-wide performance issues will be rectified through this process. Ian, it's toxic. Everybody hates each other. That's why they're sabotaging. Okay, well then we got to circle back over here to what we've talked about previously when we talked about building trusting relationships, having those chats with the people of influence, and really sitting down and understanding the toxicity and where it comes from. And then we've got to take steps to rebuild that trust. Look, I understand if you have employees that haven't had a raise in 3 years and don't see a raise on the horizon, why people could be a little grumpy, or when they're in trepidation and fear of their jobs or their benefits or whatever. I get that. And on top of that, they are overworked from their perspective, and maybe they are overworked. I understand that. But does all of that mean people get to do a bad job? I'm empathetic to how somebody can feel that way. I am, totally. All of that I just described sucks. However, thousands of citizens are counting on us to do our job well. I'm the duly appointed supervisor, manager, superintendent, whatever, lead, whatever. And I got to make sure that our crew, whether that's in 5 cubicles or out on a street, I got to make sure our crew meets the standard. because we have an obligation to do so. So I love you, and I understand you're frustrated, Bob, Jane, whatever. I understand, but I got to make sure we hit these standards. Again, if the toxicity is so intense and trust has been so fractured, then you got to go back and repair that. And that's a separate dialogue. Okay, now let's look and say that it's not the group. Most of the people are doing it right. It's one person. That calls for a whole nother approach. So the individual. So if it's the individual, then it's only one of three things: expectation, training, choice. Now, I know there's a lot of boxes, and I know it's the flow chart, but kind of like setting up your VCR, if any of you remember that, follow the flow chart. Right? Just follow the flow chart. All of the young supervisors are like, what the hell is a VCR, man? I just put in my Blu-ray and off it goes. Okay. So look at this side of the flow chart. It's only one of three things: expectation, training, choice. Expectation, training, choice. Ian, how do I figure that out? Well, I want to introduce a tool to you, and I'll give you more information on Monday about it in more formal. It's called the chat. It's a discovery technique. I call it the chat. I'm always going to use the chat. What's the chat, Ian? Open-ended questioning, where I do 80% of the listening, 20% of the talking. Because just like a good doctor, I'm trying to make a diagnosis. And in making a diagnosis, I need to ask a lot of questions. Because I'm trying to find the root cause. Write that down. The root cause of the performance issue. What's the root cause? I see the manifestations of it, but I need to know where it's coming from so I can apply the appropriate medicine and move this person forward. Sounds like this takes a lot of time. How long and how much energy do you put into dealing with poor performance? So if I take a little bit of time to figure out what I think it might be, and then I'm effective, I'm going to save a whole lot of time down the road. So this chat, what are the keys to it? 1, I do 80% of the listening, 20% of the talking. 2, I ask nothing but open-ended questions. And I don't judge, I don't defend, and I don't attack. I follow, which we'll go over in a minute, these always and nevers approaches. And I listen. Because what I'm trying to figure out is, why is this guy or gal not doing what I need them to do? Is it expectations, training, choice? Let's say, as I'm hearing them talk, I'm trying to diagnose. So I'm going to say something like this. So explain to me how you think it's supposed to be done. And they'll start walking it out for me. And I'll know right away if it's expectation. Well, Ian, I think I'm supposed to do this, and I'm supposed to do that. And wait a minute now. You skipped 3 steps. Well, I didn't think those were important. Then what's my job to do? Clarify the expectation. So I listened. I asked open-ended questions, and I found out right away. He thought those 3 steps weren't important. Now, my initial reaction would be this: what are you, a fool? Come on, man. Of course those 3 steps are important. You think we just got them there to have them there? What do you think it's about? Or something like that. Instead, I just say this: oh, okay. Well, let me clarify for you what those 3 steps are for and why we have them there and why I need them to be done in that way. Oh, I don't like that. Well, okay, brother, love you. But today, I'm in charge, and, we're going to follow that. See, I don't think you have to be a jerk. You just have to say, that's the way we're going to do it, man. And here's the reasons behind it. I do think every once in a while the boss method of motivation is okay. This is just the way we're going to do it. Now, if you want to help me come up with a better way, and you and I can sit down and come up with a better way and maybe get the other guys involved or the other gals, we might talk about a better way. If you have some great ideas, I'd love to hear them. But for today, we're doing it this way. So I asked some open-ended questions, and I found out right away expectations. So then I'm going to check for understanding. Because if I look at that person and say, all right, now that I've explained it to you, do you get it? They're going to go like this. Yep. But I got to ask another open-ended question. So walk me through it again, how it's supposed to work. Well, I'm supposed to do this, and I'm supposed to do those 3 things. I'm not happy about it, but okay. All right, good. And then what? Then this, this, and this. Perfect. Now, usually that's where it stops. Perfect. And I go off. But the key piece is that follow-up. I circle back and I check to make sure that the improved performance has occurred. The person is performing. That's important for two reasons. One, if they really have improved, woo! Great job, man. Thank you so much. I think that's missing a lot in today's workplace. A guy improved, a gal improved, they got better than they were the day before. Celebrate that. In the track business, we used to call that a PR, a personal record. If someone is performing better than they've performed in their life, then give them the gift of thanks and gratitude. And in this world that looks to beat the hell out of us every day, isn't it nice to have somebody come along and say, good job? Well, you know, people will think it's trite and I'm trying to kiss people's butt. Well, not if you do it sincerely and authentically and consistently, and you don't blow smoke. In other words, don't praise somebody if they don't deserve it. But when done properly, at the appropriate time, when the performance standard has been exceeded, met or exceeded, good job, man. Thank you. Appreciate that. Now, what if performance has not improved? Well, then it wasn't expectations. There must be a root cause that hasn't been addressed. So we circle back up. Obviously, it's been some training or some tools. Obviously, there's something else here. So I'm going to retrain. I clarified the expectations with them. So just because they know it cerebrally and can explain it back to me doesn't mean they have the ability to go do it. Maybe they don't have the skill to do it. Maybe they don't know how to use that piece of equipment. Maybe they don't understand how to do the Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. Can you do me a favor? Get that report done for me. And then, like a week later, I don't have my report. And then I still don't have it. And I go back to them and, do you understand how to do it? Oh, I understand how to do this. But they don't know how to do it because they don't know how to make that cell do that thing. And they're too afraid to ask. So how do you identify if it's training or tools? I might just sit and watch them. Or I might just go alongside of them. Or I might watch the performance to see if they really do. Or I might check the tool. It's like some of you have emailed me and said, hey, Ian, we can't watch the video. There's something wrong with your system. There ain't nothing wrong with my system. You just don't have a new enough computer, or you don't have a new enough Internet Explorer. So when you ask the third and fourth why, you find the root cause. The root cause. Mr. Toyota. Remember, Mr. Toyota said there's usually 5 whys to get to the root cause. There really was a Mr. Toyota. And one of the reasons when he was in charge, it was one of the top manufacturing companies in the world, is because they identified problems by asking 5 whys. Well, why is it like that? And why is it like that? And why? To get to the root cause, and then fix the root cause, and then you won't have the problem again. So I might observe to check and see if it's the training tools. What if it is? I'm going to retrain, or I'm going to provide the tools. That morning I went up to the warehouse. I got all those busboys brooms. We had a hand broom, a push broom in every bus station. Multiple dust pans. The ones that close up so you don't see the piece of prime rib that's been sitting there for 3 days when you're eating. Right, Jeff? Right? I gave them the tools. And then the buffet was clean. So the kids wanted the buffet to be clean. They don't want to be in a pigsty. They cared. Just had to give them the tools. Okay? If performance improves, we follow up. If performance improves, woo! Performance doesn't improve, now we got an issue. We got a problem. That person explained to me how to do it to my satisfaction. They did. That person I then observed, and when I was standing there, they know how to do it. Now we got a rub. Because now I can only assume one thing. I can only assume that since you've explained to me how to do it, clearly you know how, mentally. And when I went and watched you, you actually did it right. But when I'm not around, you ain't doing it that way. Now we got a problem. Because that tells me you're choosing not to do it. And how long can I allow as a leader somebody to choose not to do it? I can't. I can't, man. I will teach you, I will coach you, I will work with you, but as soon as I start to get the sense, because we've checked for expectations, and you explain them, I watched you do it, which means I know you know how. As soon as I realize you're choosing not to do it, that's got to end today. Because if I allow you to continue to choose not to do this thing, you'll then start picking and choosing all the things you don't want to do and do want to do. And so will everybody around you. That's a cancer. I can't let that go. And that's why I used that term earlier, coaches confront. They're not argumentative. They treat people with dignity and respect, but we're going to confront poor performance. I love you. I love you. I love you as a human being, but this performance can't continue. So, choice. Now, here's the tough thing about choice. This is where that chat really comes into play. Because I got to figure out why are they choosing not to. So it's not just enough to come to the conclusion that they're choosing not to. Now I got to go a step deeper. Dude, this is like Dr. Phil, Ian. Well, didn't you realize when you got made a manager or supervisor, you might as well hang out a shingle that says Dr. Phil? Didn't you know that? That's why it's people intense. That's why some people don't like it. So it's not enough to come to the conclusion, well, they're just choosing not to. Now I got to find out why they're choosing not to. I call it an attitudinal barrier. What's the attitudinal barrier to them doing this? Are they pissed because they got, excuse my language, are they upset because they didn't get promoted? Are they upset because they feel like they're getting screwed over and they haven't gotten a raise? Are they having a bad situation at home and going through a divorce? Did their kid just get checked into rehab and you know, he just ran a car into somebody else's house and now the mom and dad got to pay for the house and the kid's in rehab and their whole family's a wreck? You know, what's the attitudinal barrier that's causing them to choose? This is where the listening comes in so vitally. That's why I talked about listening at length in the teaching session. I got to really listen. Now, hear me on this. Listen to me as I talk about listening. I got to gain trust with this human being. There's no better way to validate another human being than listening to them. Let's say there's a big chasm between you and them. They're expecting you to come at them so all their defenses are up. I'm going to go the other way. I'm going to go low. I don't have to show them I'm in charge. They know I'm in charge. And a confident leader doesn't need to figuratively grab somebody, hopefully not literally, but, hey, I'm in charge. I don't need to do that. Everybody knows I'm in charge. I got the title. So, what I need to know from you, sir, is why? Because we retrained, and I watched you do it. You've explaining to me how to do it, but you're still not doing it. Now, look at how the sequence helps you here. You check for understanding. They clarified the expectations to your satisfaction. You went and watched them do it. You know they have the training and the tools to do it. So it can only be one thing. So, Bob, it can only be one thing, man. We did those other two steps. All I can figure out is that you're just choosing not to do it. Why? Now, where do you have that conversation? Well, that's the funny thing about the chat. To do the chat effectively, you want to ask yourself a couple questions. One, when's the best time to have that conversation? Two, where's the best time to have that conversation? Three, what's the context? What do you mean? Well, if I'm in my office, how am I going to set up my office if I have an office? Am I going to sit behind the desk because I want to come off being more authoritative? Or am I going to swing around to the other side where it's just me and him or her and I? I got to think these things through. Ian, this takes way too much time. Initially, it does take some time to get into the habit of doing it, but when you get good at it, it'll go quickly. So, I need to have a conversation with them, and it may be contentious, so I'm going to think it through. I also gave you a couple of other tools already in our sessions. One, what's their style? Nurturer, energizer, organizer, and what's your style? And then what's their communication approach? Remember we talked about that? Value-based, emotion-based, fact-based, belief-based. What's their style? And can you adjust to meet theirs? So those two things help you going in. And then you ask yourself when and where in the context. And now you're ready to have that conversation. And I would have it just like I said. We sat down, you explained to me the expectations. I watched you do it, or I checked the training and the tools. It's all good. But the only conclusion that I can draw is you just are choosing not to. Why? And just let them talk. And then just let them talk and validate them. Now, when they say, well, because I'm pissed off, don't defend. Don't defend. Even though your natural tendency is to push back, just listen. Just listen. Just listen. And I might even say something like this. Wow, that's crazy, man. I never knew you were so upset about this. But it's clear you're really upset. And I even throw in this. I'm sorry. Now, what am I sorry for? I'm not necessarily sorry that we did something wrong, but I'm sorry that they're this upset. Because all I care about is this, man. I just need the performance to improve. That's all I care about. I'm not trying to see who's going to win or lose or all that nonsense. That's nonsense. I just need the performance to improve. So for me, I'm gonna listen till I find out what the attitudinal barrier is. What's that thing that's causing the choice to happen? The choice of poor performance, choice of not doing it right. And then once I've done that, I'm gonna respond in some way. Wow, I didn't know that, or wow, that's interesting, or wow, I'm sorry you feel that way. But then I got to clarify. And I'm going to clarify a couple of things. I'm going to clarify the timeline for the improvement to occur. Okay, I hear you. I'm empathetic to you. I understand that. And if you can even say this, and you know what, I'll look into that now. Now that you've brought it to my attention, I'll look into it. Or you might even say this, Bob, you know, I don't have control over our wages and where we're at wage-wise and what we're going to do. The commissioners or the agency or the whatever. Blah, blah, blah. But today, right here, man, I got to have you doing the job. Okay? Because we're all feeling that, brother or sister. We're all feeling that. But today, I got to have you doing this job. And I know you know how to do it. And I've seen you do it. And you've just told me you're choosing not to do it. And you put me in a tough spot because I can't allow that to continue, man. So, for today, I need the performance to improve in blank time frame. Give them a specific time frame. And then you say this, and how can I help you? You can't help me. Okay, cool. That's fine. But notice I at least put that out there. Clarify my role in you improving. What do you need me to do to help you? Because I'm here to help you, man. See, that's that coaching. My job is to get you from where you're at today to what you can potentially become. So I'm happy to say, I need you to improve this. You've told me why you're choosing not to. Okay, I get that. Now we need to move forward because I'm listening to that because that's a way to validate them. You want to gain trust with another human being? Listen to them. But then I got to come back and I have to say, I need this to improve. And here's the time frame for that. And then let them dictate your role. Okay, how do you want me to play? What do you want me to do? And then they'll clarify that for you. And then what do you do? Then, based on the time frame, you're going to go back and check. And if their performance has improved, awesome. If their performance has not improved, straight to formal discipline. Straight to your formal progressive discipline process that is well laid out through your human resources department or perhaps your third-party agreement. And you know what you'll find? You are on solid ground, dude. You are on solid ground. You're never going to get a grievance on that. You know how I know you're not going to get a grievance on that? Because one, in thousands of situations, I never had a grievance. And if we had, we had minimal grievances. And if we had, we always won. Always. And even when it went to Labor Relations Board, always won. Because this was the background. Here's the day and times that we chatted about expectations. And they explained to me the expectations. Here's the day and the time where we sat down and went through the training and the tools, and I saw them actually performing. And then I had a chat with them about why they might be choosing not to and gave them an opportunity to air any challenges that they may be facing. I gave them a timeline for the performance improvement, and I even asked them how I could support them. And they chose to go back out and they chose not to perform. And that's why we had no other choice but to go into progressive discipline. Simple. This is that process. This is that approach, this coaching approach that takes care of problems before progressive discipline is necessary. But it may lead to progressive discipline. I like it because it's sequential, it's formal, and it covers my butt. Because I'm going to handle everybody this way. So there's consistency, there's consistency, there's consistency, there's consistency. We address poor performance. Is it individual or is it group? Is it expectation, training, or tools? Or is it training, policy, procedure? And then I act accordingly. Now what happens is over a period of time, as you follow this sequence, I'll tell you what happens. It becomes a habit. So now when I see poor performance within my own organization, whether that's within the volunteer organization or within the business, I know it's one of those three things. And ultimately, whose fault is it? Mine. Because I'm the leader. So poor performance comes from leadership. Drucker, the great business guru, said that 85% of poor performance comes from leadership and management. That's you. And that's your directors that I talked to earlier today. I know we don't have a lot of time for questions, but Margie, do we have any questions? We don't have a question. So what's going to happen now? Well, obviously we got to unpack this, right? So on Monday we will unpack this, and we'll talk about the chat, and I'll give you some reminders. And in the coming days, we're going to give you some reminders around this. Now, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do on Monday, I'm going to ask you to pull out that always and never, that always and never sheet, always and never. And I'm going to ask you to read it at the beginning of every day for the next week. Ian, man, this is like Anthony Robbins, dude. You're going to make me put up stickers on my mirror or something. You know, you want to get better or not? I mean, that's a proven scientific approach to the behavioral changes, daily reinforcement. So I'm going to ask you to read these at the beginning of the day, in your office or in your workplace or in your truck or in your cubicle, whatever. Always treat people with respect. Separate the performance from the person. Respect each person as an individual. Don't send out that blanket memo. Respect that each person has abilities. Just because they're a poor performer in this specific area doesn't mean they're a piece of junk. What's the old expression? God didn't make no junk. And whether you believe in cosmic coincidence or the hand of divine providence, both would agree that the human being is the pinnacle on the earth. So, treat them as such. Separate the person from the performance. Treat all employees with dignity. Listen to employees' complaints, suggestions, and problems. Listen. Take action on requests when you say you will. Always take I and you out of the conversation. I think you are no good. You don't want that message to come across. Understand that employees' achievements are also your achievements. Celebrate them. Compliment and praise when it's due. Don't blow smoke. See each problem as an opportunity to learn and grow. That's the coach. Oh, okay, we got a problem here. Let me take some corrective measures because I know through this process you're going to be better at the end. And then we will have journeyed together. You will have perceived that I've helped you. We've built some trust. Attack problems, not people. No, why do I use the word attack? Because it's got to be aggressive. I got to take problems on aggressively. But I don't mean I have to attack people. Appreciate effort. Set a good example. So you've got to set the standard, right? Nobody runs any faster than the lead sled dog. Never criticize and counsel in front of other people. Never criticize the person specifically, address only the performance. Discuss employee problems. Never discuss employee problems with subordinates. So in other words, don't be like, you know what, guys, if John was just when John's not there. Because what you're sending the message is you'll talk about them when you're standing with John. Don't undermine your credibility in that way. Don't be insincere with your people. Never accuse or blame others for mistakes. Never gossip. Never counsel or criticize unnecessarily. Never falsely compliment or praise. Never falsely compliment or praise. Never pass an employee without acknowledging him or her. That last one's important. They're human beings. Say something. Don't just walk by people in a hallway. So for the next 5 days, starting on Monday, I want you to read that. On Monday morning, you're going to get some more tips. And later in the week, you're going to get a couple more tips as well. Reinforcing this coaching matrix, this diagnostic. It's a way to improve performance. I got 1.5 minutes left, so listen to me. Now comes the time on Monday when I'm going to ask you to pick out your one thing. What do you mean? So here's the drill. I told you that we're going to ask you to pick out one thing and commit to working on it, working on getting better at it. Now, you've already had a couple of opportunities to kind of look introspectively within yourself. I've given you a number of exercises to help you identify what the one thing might be. And last time when we talked, I even gave you an exercise that you could send out to others to give you some insight or some wisdom on what the one thing might be. But make no mistake, we're all going to commit to picking out one thing and being better at it. Why? Because otherwise it's a waste of time. It's a waste of my time and resources, and it's a waste of your town or your cities and taxpayer dollars and resources. However, if everybody in the department, or at least everybody going through the program, could pick out one thing and 11 weeks from now, 12 weeks from now, be better at it, think of the impact. Everybody just picks out one thing. Now, I'm not going to tell you what the one thing should be. I've given you enough exercises and enough opportunities for introspection that you can pick out the one thing. But what I am going to ask you to do is tell me. Now, you can tell me in a traditional way. There's a piece of paper at the end of this handout. You can fill it out, scan it in, and email it to me. Or on Monday morning, right there, Jeff put it on the screen. Or on Monday morning, in the email you get, there'll be a link that says your commitment, your one thing commitment. Click that, fill it out. You'll get an email back with your commitment, and I'll get an email with your commitment. And then in the coming weeks, I'm going to follow up on your commitment. So, make your commitment. If you don't make your commitment, I'll be following up as well. And I'll say to you, hey, dude, I didn't get a commitment from you. Hey, dude, where's your commitment? So, whether you send it in a more traditional way, fill it out by hand, scan it in, email it, or whether you fill it out online, make your commitment. I will then follow up with you in the weeks to come. How's your commitment? How's your commitment? How's your commitment? I may even give you feedback on your commitment. Don't just fill it out with a bunch of nonsense, because I'll push it back at you and be like, what's up, dude? That's pretty vague, or whatever. And then I'll also follow up the other way, which means if you don't turn it in, I'll follow up with you as well. Why? Because I'm some taskmaster? No, because we got to make this a valuable experience. And the only way to make it a valuable experience is everybody gets better at least one thing. Now, maybe you get better on more than one thing, but we're all going to get better at least one thing, including me. And I'll come to you the next time we get together and tell you what my commitment is. How's that? All right. As I said to you before, you're critical to our communities because you're the mid-level leader. You take the vision and direction of elected officials and executive leaders, and you translate it into frontline action on a daily basis. And then through that frontline action, your department touches every citizen from cradle to grave. You're incredibly important. You're incredibly important. Not only is what you do important, but you specifically, within the continuum of your organization, are the key. The mid-level leader is always the key because you're that transition point, vision of direction to daily action. I thank you for your hard work and effort. I thank you for all that you do. We'll talk to you on Monday. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.